Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in the Harvard Classics Lectures. This is lecture number 64 over Sophocles' Oedipus the King, or sometimes referred to as Oedipus Rex in the Latin, or Oedipus Tyrrhenius in the Greek. Now that word Tyrrhenius is where we get our word tyrant from, but I think there has to be some comments made about the name of this play at some point in our conversation. We are in volume 8 of the Harvard Classics, the 9 Greek plays. If you haven't been following my lectures on LearnStrong.net, I certainly recommend that you do so. Lecture 59 was our Intro to Greek Drama. Lecture 62 through 62 is Aeschylus's classic Oresteia, the 3 plays of the Oresteia, the Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and the Furies, or the Eumenides. And then in our last lecture, we finished up with Aeschylus by talking about his classic Prometheus Bound. We now turn to another classic. And even though Aeschylus is considered the father of Greek tragedy, most of the time when you do research on Sophocles, you will hear that Sophocles was the greatest of the Greek playwrights and that Oedipus was his greatest play. Now, I have given other lectures on Oedipus, on Sophocles, and the play Antigone, which is the other play included in this volume, elsewhere on LearnStrong.net. So I'm going to go ahead and give this lecture at level 1, where I'm going to spend more time following closely the very language of the play, all right? But before we get into it, just to remind, our learning theory in 303, we always like to come back to it. We like to focus. What specifically are we doing here? This is not just about knowing the events of the play, although, you know, you're obviously going to know that from our study. But we're rather trying to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. So in other words, we're going to use our reading at 3 levels. Remember, at level 1 we answer the question, what does the text say? Summary. At level 2, what does the text mean? Here we subdivide it to A, themes, messages, a 2B, rhetoric. Not what Sophocles says, but how the genius Sophocles says it. And here we'll be concentrating, as we did with our study of Aeschylus, on 2 things. We'll look at primary symbols of the text, and we'll look at some of the primary conflicts of the text. We're going to see quite a bit of both. Finally, at level 3, we're most interested at level 3, of course, because we're again trying to learn, and we ask, how can I relate to this text? First of all, in 3A, how can I relate to other texts? For example, we're going to mention something, as we've already mentioned in earlier lectures, about Aristotle's classic Poetics. Why? Well, 11 times in that classic essay, he talks about Oedipus Rex as being the very best example of what tragedy is supposed to be. Which, you know, I mean, in some ways, right away, kind of doomed this play, and of course held it as one of the great texts of all time. And then finally, at level 3B, we'll ask, how do I relate personally to a text like this? Now, of course, some of you already know that the Oedipal story is the story about the guy that kills his dad and marries his mom and has 4 kids by his mom. Whoa, yeah, I know, it's gross, right? But wait, before you get up and walk out, this is not a play about a guy that wakes up one morning and goes, you know what, I'm really tired of my life. I think I'll jack my dad, marry my mom, and have 4 children with... No. That is not this play. If that was this play, A, it would not be, you know, probably read today as a classic, and B, we would only see Oedipus as a villain. This is not a play where we see Oedipus as a villain. Rather, we see him as the protagonist of the play. We identify with him in some really disturbing ways. What are you talking about? I never thought about killing my dad and marrying my mom. Freud says otherwise. We'll talk about that later. But no, that's not the point of this play either. We're going to look at this play then from that perspective of 3B. How can I relate to this text with some questions? And as we've said all the way through our Harvard Classics lectures, and about any text that I lecture in 303, if the text is a classic, it's not a classic because somebody tells you it's a classic. It's a classic because it somehow speaks to you, and it speaks to your experiences in your life. And I think this play will in fact prove that that can be done. I hope so anyway. Now, we're going to look at 2 of the 3 of the plays that are often referred to as the Oedipal cycle. Okay, now we mustn't confuse this cycle of the Oedipus story with the trilogy of Aeschylus. The only extant trilogy that we actually have from Greek theater is in fact the Oresteia. Now, it is true that there are 3 plays that kind of fit together rather nicely, but ironically, Sophocles did not write those plays in the order in which we usually study them. Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the King, Oedipus Tyrrhenius, Oedipus at Colonus, which is the middle play, and then finally Antigone. Ironically, Antigone was actually the first play performed, written, and performed, and then Oedipus Rex to follow, with Oedipus at Colonus being the last maybe play that Sophocles ever produced. Well, speaking of Sophocles, let's turn now and just, and I know I've said this elsewhere in some other lectures, but let's go ahead and just summarize quickly. Really, when we look at Sophocles, we are looking at one of the greatest of all time. Now, hey, don't confuse Oedipus with Orestes or Odysseus, even though their name starts with O, right, okay? And don't confuse Sophocles, our writer, poet, playwright here, with Socrates, the great philosopher who we talked about through our study of Plato in earlier Harvard Classics lectures and elsewhere on LearnStrong.net. Sophocles, born 496, lives 90 years, and so he is a stable in Athens, and he is really famous throughout his life. He dies in 405, 406 BCE. He comes out of the music background, and some scholars have pointed out this is foundational to appreciating what Sophocles does. He comes out of a music background where he studies with a really famous teacher, and then he ends up actually as an actor. So kind of like Shakespeare later, he will be both actor as well as playwright. When he quote-unquote loses his voice, his ability to project his voice, he then begins the writing career that will of course make him most famous. Now, he will publish in 429 Oedipus. But there's a whole lot of interesting stuff that will happen in his lifetime. I'll just mention a few of these. At the age of 28, he beats the great Aeschylus in the poetry, play, drama competition, okay? In his whole life, he never fell below second place in the prize competitions. Ironically, the year that he does publish 429, Oedipus the King, it takes second place, not first place, which is really ironic because this, of course, becomes the greatest, most famous play ever written, certainly in the Greek theater. Some have argued this is the most famous play ever written. Some have argued the reason that this is the most famous play ever written because it keeps coming back over and over again. And in fact, you can still see this play performed sometimes on stages in the city. That's not true, by the way, often of the Oresteia, but it's certainly true of Oedipus, for reasons maybe we'll talk about later, right? Now, like his father, Sophocles is a pretty conservative political thinker, and we're going to see this both in this play as well as in Antigone itself, okay? And we'll have more to say about that play later. Check this out. He wrote 120 plays, and he never took less than second prize, which immediately makes him one of the greatest writers of all time in terms of just appreciating the competition of writing and people saying, wow, you're really good. Out of that, only 7 of his plays remain. That, of course, is a real tragedy, and scholars have often asked, while we think of Oedipus the King and Antigone as 2 of the greatest plays ever written, it's altogether possible that if we were to sit down with Sophocles, he might say, oh, no, that's way down the line at 8, 9, 10. I've got some great plays that I wrote. You just don't know about them because they were unfortunately lost along the way. He introduced, for example, a 3rd and later a 4th character. He does end up de-emphasizing the chorus as he goes, and in this regards begins to make his plays increasingly more modern. And in fact, when we look at this play and we actually read it together, we'll already begin to see a little bit of difference between what he does and what, for example, Aeschylus does. And let's say it out loud, this play starts to look increasingly like a, can I say it, Shakespeare play, which is, of course, a far more modern kind of play. Now, in an earlier lecture, we mentioned that Aristotle's Poetics, some people have said it's the greatest single work of poetic critique of tragedy. Others have said it ruined everything about the way we watch and understand texts like Oedipus the King. And yet Aristotle, 11 times in that little essay, will mention Oedipus Rex as the greatest tragedy ever written. So let's go ahead and put that in our notes. Now, let's just briefly review. We've given these lectures elsewhere on LearnStrong.net. If you're interested in a more full representation of this idea, I even write it on the whiteboard. We'll not play that game today. But let's at least review. What is it that Aristotle says about tragedy? Well, first and foremost, he says that the real play is not what happens on stage. The real play is what happens in the audience as the audience engages the text and the play and the actors and the storyline, what he called plot. How does that happen? Well, it's significant that he picks out the word protagonist. That character with whom the audience most identifies with. Now that is significant. Bracket that in your notes. Because depending upon which audience will observe this play, which audience will observe the play Antigone, for example, you may have a different kind of response to the quote-unquote protagonist. The reason why Aristotle loved Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the king, so much is because it's clear who the protagonist is. No one sits in the stands going, gee, I wonder who I'm supposed to identify with. Oedipus gets all of the important lines of the play. Oedipus is center stage, if we can use that term, throughout the play. And the audience is forced to have to watch what? Well, we already know, as we've said in earlier lectures, if we're Greek, we already know the storyline. When, for example, Aeschylus sets his play, Prometheus Bound, with Prometheus, everybody knows about Prometheus and how he gets jacked on that rock. Everybody knows the story of Orestes after Agamemnon's homecoming and he gets jacked by Clytemnestra. And everybody knows the story of Oedipus, okay? So everybody already knows the story. And yet, through the process of the play, we are going to watch the fall of the protagonist, of Oedipus. Why? Well, this tragic flaw, the hamartia, which is usually understood as hubris or excessive pride. How we define that, we're going to have to maybe define in our study specifically of the play. But as the protagonist goes through this fall from high to low, as we sometimes have referenced it, two things happen for the audience. One, they engage in the release of powerful emotions, catharsis or purgation. Two, those primary emotions are fear and pity, pathos. The fear part is whatever is happening to Oedipus, we go, oh man, I hope that never happens to me. The pity part is, it's never happened to me, but I feel really bad that it's happening for him. It was Aristotle who argued that the primary difference between you and your dog is that you both can look at the sunset, but only one of you can appreciate it. His appreciation of aesthetic theory is central to how Aristotle defined the greatness of this play. In other words, when we watch Oedipus fall, we inevitably find ourselves, are you ready for this? Feeling sorry for this cat. And we will, even though we know what's going to happen, even though we know this is a story about a guy who in one day realizes that many, many years ago, he was born and left out on a mountain. He was found. He was raised as a foundling, but never told that his mother and father were not his real mother and father. Then he gets a message that says he's going to kill his dad and marry his mom, and he's going to end up running away from home. Ends up killing his dad, marrying his mom, having 4 children with his mom. And on the day of the play, Aristotle argued for what we call the unities of time, place, and action. We said it before. That means within a 24-hour period, in a single place, with a very particular and linear plot, what's going to happen? Oedipus is going to find out the truth of his life. And in that moment, he will be destroyed. So let's go ahead and say it out loud. Of all the tragedies that you can study, probably none are as tragic as this one. Although some of you will say Antigone is just every bit as tragic for maybe different reasons. We'll have to debate that one in our next lecture. Well, since I've lectured on this play already, and I've talked about it in generalities, let's go ahead first of all and just briefly overview the storyline. And then let's get into level 1 and specifically enjoy the language. First of all, the Oedipus story. I've already referenced it a few times. We are in Thebes. There's a great king named Laius. He has a beautiful wife named Jocasta, and they have a child. However, there is an oracle which says, a messenger from the gods that says, this child will end up growing up, killing his father, Laius, marrying his mother, Jocasta, and therefore you're going to have to deal with this. It's interesting that in this play, that it seems to be Jocasta who in the end is the one who will give the child to a shepherd, who will take the child up onto the mountain. The child's feet are pierced at the ankles, and Oedipus can actually mean the swollen foot. Okay, they would maybe pierce the ankles of the child so that the child couldn't crawl away, which is a little bit, of course, problematic because the child's left up there as a small infant, can't crawl yet. the child is found, or a shepherd who is to take the child, Oedipus, up onto the mountain, doesn't end up leaving him there, but rather gives him to another shepherd, who in turn turns around and gives him to the king Polybus of Corinth. And Oedipus is raised the son of a king in Corinth with Polybus and his mother, okay? Who he thinks is his mother and father. When he is a young man, he's at a party. Somebody makes a comment about the fact that he has dubious parentage or something like that, like maybe he's a bastard or a foundling or something like that. Oedipus asks his parents. They say nothing about it. He goes to the oracle, and it's at that oracle that Oedipus is told, you are a cursed man. The fates are against you. You will kill your father and marry your mother. So, and this is crucial to the storyline, right? By the way, this is only referenced briefly in the play itself. Everybody pretty much understands the storyline as we're outlining it now. Happened before the day of the play when it opens, right? Oedipus does what he thinks is the best thing. Let's put that in our notes, because that's one of the central lines of this play. Oedipus is always doing what he thinks is the best thing. And in this case, what's the best thing? Well, leave home. He's old enough anyway. And in a motif that we see over and over and over again enacted, where the young man goes out on his own. Sometimes it's the young woman, but most often in Greek mythology, it's the young man goes out on his own. He goes through a series of adventures, and in those series of adventures, he's walking. He's walking towards what's called the Crossroads, where three roads meet, and there, two important things happen to him. The first thing that happens to him is he sees this chariot coming, along with these men, bodyguards, whatever. And the king is in the chariot. Of course, this is his father, Laius. He just doesn't know it, the king of thieves. They get into an altercation, and are you ready for this? Oedipus jacks the old man and kills him along with the bodyguards, only one of them getting away. Whoa. Now, one of the things we'll point out is that Laius has a terrible temper, as does his son Oedipus. And so when they go at each other, Oedipus ends up killing the old man. However, Oedipus sees this as an act of self-defense, and he has a tendency, like Hercules, to kind of lose his temper and get upset. We're going to see this actually in the play a couple of different times, where Oedipus will do this very thing, and he just kind of goes berserk, and he gets a little bit upset, and then a lot upset. Okay? So that's the first thing that happens at the Crossroads. The second thing that happens at the Crossroads is that Oedipus meets this scary monster, this Sphinx, as it's referred to, right? The head of a lion, and the head of a woman, the body of a lion, wings, the whole thing. The riddle of the Sphinx can't be answered by anyone. And so what she's done is she's put a plague on the city of Thebes, and she basically jacks anybody who can't answer the question. This is, of course, not mentioned at the riddle, is referenced, but not actually told here in our play. But everybody watching this play in Athens of the day knew exactly what the riddle of the Sphinx was. Much has been made about this riddle. The question is simple. What animal walks on 4 legs in the morning, on 2 legs at noon, and on 3 legs in the evening? You're smiling because, of course, you know the answer, because, of course, we've heard this before. Oedipus did well in his English class. He paid attention when we talked about distinctions between the literal and the figurative and the metaphoric. And he says, well, metaphorically, you're speaking, of course, of a human being who in the morning of the human's life crawls on all 4s, in the noontime of a human's life walks on 2 legs, and in the evening of a human's life walks on 2 legs and a cane, ergo 3 legs. Ergo, you're talking about a human. The Sphinx then will go away to die, and the city of Thebes is relieved. Jocasta comes out of the city along with the Theban members and says, whoa, amazing, you have relieved us. Thank you. We've recently lost our king. We need a new king. Would you like to come into the city, become the king, and to marry me as queen? And Oedipus thinks his life is going great. I mean, the only reason why any of you are going gross right now is because you know what Oedipus does not know. Remember, he thinks that his mother is back in Corinth as the queen back there, and his father Polybus. He doesn't have any idea that the man he killed was his own father Laius, and that the woman who's just invited him to come and be the king and to be her husband is in fact his own mother. By the way, sometimes students go, well, dude, wouldn't he be able to tell, like she'd be like really old? Not necessarily. Remember that young girls could be married off to older men. So it's very possible. We say this, for example, even in our study of Shakespeare's Hamlet, with Hamlet and his mother Gertrude. It's very possible that Oedipus is far closer in age to Jocasta than Jocasta was in age to Laius. Okay? So anyway, be it as it may, before this play opens, here's what's gone down. There's been enough time for Oedipus and Jocasta, his, how do you say it politely, wife, mother, to have 4 children. 2 sons, 2 daughters. Okay, the 2 sons, Polynices, Eutocles, the 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. Okay? Now, as I've said in an earlier lecture, I mean, I lectured this play for a really long time, and I guess I realized that for some students this was problematic. They could not get over this idea of, oh, this is just gross. I can't even deal with this play because it's just so gross, the whole incest thing and everything. So I play this game out as I have in other lectures. I'll play it again. Imagine for a moment that you go on, you graduate from high school, you go to college, at a party, you meet this amazing person. The 2 of you quickly fall in love. You end up finishing school together, and you get married. And you have 4 children. Let's just say 2 sons and 2 daughters. You're living this amazing life. I mean, in every way, your life is incredible. The person you're married to is amazing. Your children are amazing. Your health is great. You're strong. You're a leader in the community you live in. Everything about your life is awesome. And then you get an email that says, surprise, the day you were born, you were actually born a twin. And through a strange set of circumstances, you ended up being separated at birth. Now the only reason why some of you are making the face you're making right now is because of this story, okay, and the implications of this story. In real life, what would you actually do? You would go, no way, I have a twin brother, twin son. No way, this is incredible. Dude, I'm going to go find out. And you begin to do your research. And of course, your research tells you, wow, what do you know? Your brother, your sister ended up going to the same university you did. And uh-oh, that's going to be this play. So try and find an adjective or 2, awkward comes to mind, obviously, to write down in your notes that somehow qualifies